In my recent book, Conflict Management in Organizations, we look at a whole series of innovative practices for managing conflict in organizations, both conflict involving individual employees and conflict involving groups of employees, especially those who are organized in trade unions. In recent years, one of the areas I've worked on is conflict in the workplace and conflict in the organization, and this has become a major area of management interest internationally. There are two major trends evident in the area. One of these is significant growth in individual grievances in the world of work, where individual employees have problems of various kinds. They could be just grievances concerning work conditions. They could be grievances concerning bullying and harassment, any of a range of personal problems and issues that might arise. And what we witness across all advanced economies is a very significant rise in the incidence of individual conflict of this kind in the world of work and in organizations. It's particularly evident in the incidence of claims being taken to state conflict resolution agencies, such as, for example, in Ireland, the Employment Appeals Tribunal or the Equality Tribunal, or indeed the civil courts. But what's happening in Ireland mirrors pretty well what's happening across much of the developed world. Why this is happening, I think, largely has to do with the fact that the body of employment rights granted to individuals under legislation has expanded very dramatically since the 1990s. And also employees are much more concerned and determined to vindicate their rights in the world of work. Parallel with this is another major international trend evident in Ireland, but again mirrored across developed Western economies, and that is a decline in collective conflict in organizations and in the world of work. And by collective conflict, we mean, of course, conflict between employers and trade unions, or conflict between employers and groups of employees. Why this is in decline has to do with a number of factors. One of these is there has been a decline proportionately in traditionally highly collectively conflict-prone industries like mining, docking, heavy manufacturing, surface transport, and so forth. There has also been a decline in the proportion of the workforce organized in trade unions and on whose behalf trade unions bargain collectively. So, for example, in Ireland, the high water mark of trade union organisation was reached in the early 1980s when more than 6 out of 10 people at work were members of trade unions. Currently, the figure is about 27%, so less than 1 in 3 people are members of trade unions. But even though collective conflict has declined, organisations have strived to find more flexible, more innovative ways of handling collective conflict at work, which still matters in economies. We see it currently in Ireland, for example, in the threatened disputes in the buses and in other essential public utilities. So the two big trends are a rise in the incidence of individual conflict at work and a decline in the incidence and nature of collective conflict at work. And what organizations have begun to try to do in response to these is to develop a whole array of innovative approaches to managing conflict in the workplace and in organizations. These are commonly known as ADR, or alternative dispute resolution mechanisms and practices. And they are alternative mechanisms and practices, I guess, in two distinct senses. First of all, they're alternative to resort to state conflict resolution agencies like the Employment Appeals Tribunal, the Rights Commissioners, but they're also an alternative to long-standing conventional ways in which organizations would have handled industrial conflict and individual conflict at work. Conflict in the workplace and conflict in the organization is probably inevitable. It occurs pretty well everywhere. It can be potentially very destructive. It can be destructive for the person involved. It can have a major bearing on their interpersonal well-being. It can have a major bearing on their careers, on their job prospects. And for organizations themselves, serious incidents of conflict can affect morale, job satisfaction, But they can also affect the corporate reputation of a company if a nasty incident spills out into the courts or into an external tribunal and gets into the media. That can have a significant impact on brand identity and on corporate reputation. All of these things being the case, because conflict is pretty well inevitable, because it is so potentially destructive for the different parties to the employment relation, what matters then is that organizations find the most effective and innovative ways to resolve conflict as possible. And that has been pretty well the subject of much of the work I have been doing in research in recent years.